Welcome to today's edition of Online for Authors. I'm Carole O'Neill, and with me today is Jo Taylor, who has just written her first novel, Margaret of Thibodaux. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. It's my pleasure. Even though Margaret was only 14 and she was dealing with the loss of her mom and all of that sad stuff, I found that this coming of age story was refreshing. It actually brought back some memories of my summers growing up. And you're not going to believe this, but my next door neighbor was Mrs. Thibodaux.
That's funny.
That was her name.
Oh.
Now, I understand that you also grew up with the stepmother like Margaret did. Is this story somewhat autobiographical? Is it like an autobiography?
A little bit. Yes and no. I took the components of my life. I actually had 3 stepmothers at some point. So, and grew up in the 70s. I lived in the South briefly. I'm an Army brat, and so we moved around quite a bit. And I also do have some of those psychic abilities that she had. And so that's kind of the idea of the story was, what if I grew up with people where there was a mentor who could teach me what the heck was going on, and that I had friends I could talk to about it, because I made friends every year. We moved every year. I never had somebody that I could tell, hey, I'm a freak and I can do these things.
That's great. Yeah.
And so I actually placed it in Thibodaux. I've been there and did research. I did not live there, but I didn't want any of my childhood friends to think that the stories were based on them. I wanted it to be clearly made up.
Of course. But I also know that you are a medium or a psychic.
Yes, ma'am.
So I thought about that. And then somewhere I read that you also lost a very dear friend when you were a teenager. And I kept seeing these little familiar things. And I thought, gee, maybe she started to write a memoir and then she turned it into a fictional novel. So I had to ask, just in case that was what you were thinking about.
Yes, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of put pieces of my life in it, especially losing a friend at that age. That was something I thought tough. I could explore. So yes and no. I actually never thought about writing a memoir. I just thought, I'm going to retell my story so that it's, sometimes that heals you when you've had a bad experience. You just retell your story. So this is what I wished my childhood would have been like.
Right. And they do tell you to write what you know. So, what better story than what you lived, I think, or much of what you lived.
Yes.
Margaret's determined to find a way to contact her mother. She needs permission to accept this possible stepmother. Let's talk about Jezebel. The rumor has it in the town that she was the voodoo priestess, and she's such a great character. But at any rate, I loved her dialogue, and I can still hear her friends of ours who moved from Louisiana after Katrina. And that dialect is so familiar. So talk a little bit about Jezebel.
So Jezebel is based on an entity that actually exists in what's called the Akashic Records. If you're familiar with the Akashic Records at all, it's more that they're soul books. There's actually mentors and entities. Say entities, that sounds terrible. They're beings that actually you can go and ask for information from. And so I had many meetings with Grandma as I was learning to do all these things. And I thought this would be, if I knew she existed when I was a kid and I could have gone to her. So Jezebel is based on Grandma in the Akashic Records. And a lot of what I'm writing as her dialogue is instructive. If you know anything about the records, this is how it works. If you don't know, it sounds like she's a mentor and she's teaching Margaret things, but it actually has some basis in non-physical but real experiences in the Akash. So
much more than who dat.
Exactly. And the thing I had fun with was when I've gone to New Orleans many times, and we would go on the voodoo tours and things like that. And the people who practice voodoo are totally normal. You wouldn't like see them walking down the street. And kids in elementary school will make up these stories about people in the neighborhood that they don't know. So there became this lore about how she was a voodoo woman. And turns out she's like, yeah, I grew up around it. I don't really use it much for, I do a little healing and stuff like that. But so she doesn't turn out to be this voodoo woman. And that should be one of the things that kind of keys Margaret into, just because that's the rumor, that's not necessarily how things are.
Well, I think they were afraid from outside our house. They even thought, what's in there?
Exactly.
And, she turns out to be a very major character in Margaret's life. And friendship is kind of a theme throughout this story. I love the talking tree. Tell us about that talking tree, and in the bayou, on the edge of the bayou, but also her best friend, Honey. So talk a little bit about Honey and the talking tree.
So Honey came first. Honey was kind of the conglomeration of all my best friends that I've had through life. And I wanted Honey to be very, very good. The beyond reproach. And we've all known people like that. And I had 2 or 3 best friends who were way better people than I was at the time. And so I remember going to them and looking up to them. And I thought everyone should have a Honey in their life. And then the problem was, is specifically plot-wise, is it gets very boring to be in the living room and the room and the bedroom and the kitchen. And I didn't want them to just move in the house. So I had to have somewhere in the neighborhood that they would go, and with nothing to do. As you remember when you were a kid, there really wasn't activity set up. You had to figure it out. And so, and there really is a house, a large house. It looks like Tara right across from where I'm setting this tree up. And I thought, what if, when they own the property all the way down to the bayou, across the street and all the way down. And they could have set up a swing set there. And so that's kind of how I had them. That's where they did their conversations. And that's where they that was their meeting place. Yeah.
It was just like staying out as a young kid. And like they did, they waited till that whistle blew at night to go home. And everybody went in at that point. Very, very familiar. Robert is also an important character in this book. I could place myself on that rooftop across from him. He represents quite a twist in this book, and he's a couple years older than the girls. Why do you think he hangs out with Margaret and Honey?
Well, part of it is he likes them, and he's a more sensitive guy, and even now, but especially in the 70s, it was much more the guy thing. They didn't hug. They insulted each other constantly. It was much more being guy all the time. And so I think some men who were a little bit more sensitive, I always hung around with guy friends. They liked that they could be around me, and they didn't have to be 100% guy all the time. They could be a little more sensitive around girls. And it wasn't just the romance, angle. That wasn't what they were always looking for. And so I kind of liked that idea of just kind of placing him in that position and letting him be who he would. And he wouldn't necessarily say those things to his guy friends. Right. So that was kind of that exploration of the sensitive man.
Yes, he was. He certainly was. The setting of the Bayou of Louisiana became a character of its own. Mm-hmm. I love that whole area. And of course, hurricanes are a major part of life down there. So that whole scene that you write about, the water and the swimming, and it's very true. And I'm not going to go any further because I don't want to give anything away. But I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to know about the fish. Who were the fish?
Okay.
I thought I knew the fish. I thought they were the nuns. But this morning I looked back and I said, where are the fish? I've got to ask her.
So the fish they appear in the prologue when she's little, and she's not she doesn't really like the church ladies. They kind of get on her nerves, and they're kind of dismissive of her. And there's actually a really subtle reason why they're kind of, I'm going to use the word pissy because it describes how they are, in that her daddy was friends with this Black family. And so back then in the 70s, it was a little bit less than, it wasn't all segregated. I remember having Black friends in the South.
Yeah.
But there was still sometimes that underlying disapproval, social disapproval. And so that whole prologue scene was setting up that they disapproved. They disapproved of her. They disapproved of the family, but they were still there because they were part of the church family. And so she ended up, and she said they look like fish because they would talk, and she didn't know what they were talking about. And their eyes were all red and everything from crying at the funeral. And so the fish are the church ladies. And so that kind of carries through the story. But I realize how sometimes you can get lost as to, oh, wait, where did they come from?
I know. Well, to me, the fish, I grew up in a Catholic upbringing, and of course we had the nuns.
Right.
And if you look at them in their outfits, they sometimes look like penguins. And so I sort of connected penguins and fish, and I said, oh, these must be the nuns of that area.
Well, they could be. So I didn't specifically
same
talk
kind
about
of thing. Yeah, they do have that opinion, and they overlook and
I didn't
whatever.
want to beat up on the nuns. They've been beat up enough. But a lot of it was the fish were the people who kind of reigned it over you about what a good Catholic they were. And they were actually not, because they were not very charitable and they were not very nice. And so Margaret was very opinionated about that.
Of course. I did notice that you lost your mom at a very young age, and consequently you grew up with a stepmother or two, actually. But did you have those feelings when there was a new woman that would come in to be part of your family that Margaret had? Were you concerned like that?
No, frankly, no. And that's kind of what I thought. If I'd had a brain in my head, I probably should have. But my mom passed when I was 2, so I was very young. And then my dad got remarried that same year. And he got remarried because he had 2 children under, let's see, my sister was 4. So he had 2 children under 5. And this woman he married had lost her husband and had a son. And so it was kind of, I'm sure they liked each other, but it was kind of, it was kind of like, can we help each other out here? And so I wasn't, she didn't like me in particular, but I wasn't threatened in the way that Margaret was. My mom used to come in. That's where I got all that. She used to come in, sit at my feet, but it never occurred to me that would stop. And it continued the whole time that my mother.
So did your mom stop coming when the new woman appeared?
Nope.
She continued to stay throughout your whole life.
Oh, still to this day, she shows up every once in a while.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I said, this had to have happened to her because,
It's very specific.
I'm thinking this is more and more a memoir. I'm sorry. No. Okay, but we go farther into the story of Margaret, and we don't want to give away in the ending. So we're going to ask my audience to, if they want more information about this book, to click onto the link below on the screen, Novels and Latte. It's in with Facebook. And you can find out more about the book, and you might even win a copy. So I think we'll leave it there. The book I find fascinating. I thought at first, well, it's a YA book. Well, no, it's not, because so many of us have memories back there, and then so it's good for all age women that want to read it, and I suppose it guys too. But it's definitely not a YA. I mean, it's definitely more universal. So Joe, this is not your first publication, even though this is your first novel. Tell me something about Postcards.
So Postcards, I was out last year, 2024, and I decided I was going to be an indie author. I didn't want to go through the whole rigmarole of trying to get published. And so I thought I need to learn about publishing, like actually go through the whole process before I burn my wheels on one of my novels, which are my darlings. And so I'd written probably 350 short stories, maybe 500 poems, just over all the years. And so I decided I would put out a collection of short stories and poetry and go through the whole process, have it designed, have it interior designed, cover the whole shebang, and with an editor, and go through the whole process so that when I went to do my novels, I was a better publisher. And because there's a lot to learn about publishing. And so it was a little bit experimental, but it's done fine. It's in a realm that's not very popular. Short stories and poetry together is not a very popular thing to try to sell, but it's been critically okay, and I'm happy with it. I'm
you learned,
pleased.
And you learned a lot.
I learned so much, and so Margaret was a better process because of that. And then everything I learned with Margaret will be better on the next book. So
we'll talk about that in a second, but I want to ask you, do you consider yourself to be what they call a plotter or a pantster?
Oh, I love this question. I'm kind of both at this point. I started out, I come from a literary background. I have a degree in English and I wrote literary things. And so literary is mostly, the definition of it is this character driven versus plot driven. And you come up with kind of the concept. And so I would start there, and I had the overarching idea, and then I would write. And I figured out, especially with Margaret, how much I had to fix if I didn't plot it out. It took a year to go back and actually make a plot. And I thought, well, this is just silly. Yes, I can get the overarching idea to start with, but you have, before you start writing, you have to have, or I have to have, my direction, where I'm going. So I kind of start pantsing for a little while until I get I get far enough to know, is there a book in here, or is this a short story? Because some stories will not expand to fill space of a novel, or they shouldn't have. But then I will go in and I plot. I use there's an online website called Fictionary, and it has very excellent tools for people who are not normal plotters to go in and put your plot. It kind of tells you where things should fall, your inciting incident, all those. That's not normal for me. That's not my natural thought process. And so if you're having difficulty getting the plot in there, there's all kinds of help now where you can kind of get it placed in. So I'm both is the short answer. I was sure
that there would come an app that would do just what you said. I wasn't familiar with Fictionary, but I was sure it was coming. I come from a news background, so I'm non-fiction all the way. So when I started writing mysteries, I had to plot it. Because I was so used to plotting all my stories, everything was real. So you weren't fictionalizing anything. And it was difficult even when I would, start to write a paragraph, and I would realize, that's what I'm saying. And then I would show it to a writer friend, and she'd say, well, you need more information there. And I'd say, well, what do you mean I need more information? I'm telling you, it's in the house. And she said, but what's the house like? And being in television all the time, I'd say, well, you can, I was used to letting them see the picture. So I didn't have to tell them what it looked like. And it took me a while to learn how to do that. It was a whole new learning process. But anyway, what is your best time of day to write?
Really, anytime. I'm not that specific about it. I have to do any of my book work first thing in the morning. That's the only time I have to do one thing because that's when my brain works the best. But then after that, I usually write. I'll write in the middle of the afternoon. I can write with baseball on the TV. My husband's watching. I'll sit in the living room. So I don't have to concentrate that much.
That's interesting.
To write. And
that doesn't disturb you.
And I switch around from the books I'm writing. I have 4 in progress. Mostly I'm working on one now because it's fixing to go to the editor,
Well, let's talk about that one. Let's talk about that next one.
So this next one is going to be a historical fiction, and it's based on a true story. My friend had 400 letters from a man written to a woman in San Francisco. They wrote letters from 1922 to 1961. They wrote letters their entire life. And so it covered the Depression and World War II. And it's a love story. It's this very interesting thing that happened to them during World War II. And so all of the things are real. I don't have the copyright to the letters, so I had to paraphrase them. And so I'm using the letters. It's epistolary to some extent, not the whole novel. But I had to make up almost everything about her life because her letters to him were burned by the Nazis.
Wow.
So there was none of those. So we only have hers. And my friend who ended up with these letters, her grandmother had been a hospice nurse for Mimi. And so I actually have characterization from her. She wrote about what she was like and that kind of stuff. And then on the internet, I found pictures of her. How strange is that? So
that's great.
But I decided not to do it as a nonfiction because I'm very particular about facts. And if I couldn't get them all right, I was going to be, so I'd rather make it a novel, make a lot of it up as far as interactions and what happened, and then just have most of the story be what really happened.
So based on a true story.
Based on a true story, yes.
Yeah. And you say, that sounds very interesting. And you say you have a couple other things in the works as well.
Yes, I have a novel started, Road Clothes, which happened, the genesis of that was my son and I driving down the road, and there's a jacket in the middle of the road on the center line. And he's like, where do these clothes come from? And we all see them. You see a boot at the side of the road. And I thought, well, where do these clothes come
mystery.
from? Yes. And mysteries you have to plot, because if you don't plot mysteries,
right,
you're in trouble. So yes, it's going to be psychological thriller, murder mystery kind of thing. And then there's the one after that is Look Down at the Stars, and that's going to be a revisiting of grief. But so Margaret was 14.
Right.
Mimi is 36-ish, mostly through the story. The Road Clothes is going to be a woman who's 24. And then Look Down at the Stars is going to be a woman in her 40s. And so I've realized that I'm kind of doing the decades.
Yes, you are. Yes,
women.
you are.
And so now I have to write one that's 50s and 60s, since I have touched both of those decades.
That's right. I have
I'll
a niece,
just keep going.
Yeah, I have a niece who just wrote a book about menopause, and she's in her just late 50s. And you know, it's very funny, but you're right. You're going to cover it all. You're going to definitely cover all of them. And you are actually jumping genres. I mean, most people start in one, and that's where they feel comfortable, and they just keep writing in that. But you're brave enough to jump into a new genre without any problem, it seems.
I appreciate you saying that it's brave. I'm not sure that it's brave or stupid, but it's a little hard to keep, because people expect you to stay in a genre. Right. So it challenges me to kind of reinvent myself and this story and the story and the story. But it's just the stories that have interested me. And since my interests are varied, that's what's gonna come out.
I think it's fascinating. I've done a lot of mysteries, and I did some cold case mysteries and then some cozy mysteries. And we just did a show here in Myrtle Beach at the convention center last weekend. And I have some followers, and people would come up and they'd say, so is this going to be in this series? And, and I have one that's ready to go for in one of the series. And I'm just holding back because I keep thinking I might want to do something totally different. And it's funny that you said, and I say to myself, I can't do that. They expect me to write mysteries. But, you may have given me some encouragement here to.
Oh, I hope so, because I don't like being in the box, because publishing, you do this and you do this. And I'm like, but I don't want to do that part.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. So how can people contact you and follow you? You have a website, a blog?
I do. I'm mostly on Substack.
On
and Substack, and it's Characteristically Speaking, or you can look up Joe Taylor and it'll come up. I do have a website. It's joetaylorauthor.com. But most of the time I'm on Substack. So I write a newsletter every week. It comes out. Sometimes I'll write some notes. All your writer folks should get familiar with Substack and maybe go on there. It's a hoot.
Yeah, I have not done it. I'll have to do that.
It really makes finding your tribe, your readers, your followers very easy. You don't have to do all the different outreaches. They kind of come to you. Readers go to the website, and there's systems in place. My friend, Carole Page, has recently had some notoriety going on some podcasts with hundreds of thousands of views. And she recommends me. And so I've gotten followers just because, oh, Carole likes her, I'll check her out. And so that network effect for any of your
that works.
Any of your audience.
For sure.
Especially when you're starting out. I started out last year with nobody. I think I've got 1,500 followers, or 1,500 people subscribed to the newsletter. And so in a year, that's really pretty good. And it didn't feel like it was work.
Very good.
So
yeah.
I recommend it.
Substack.com?
Yes.
Substack.com. Well, I really have enjoyed talking with you.
Well, thank you. You too.
And I actually am looking forward to the next one, the different genre, and even the one after that. So keep it up. Keep up the good work. I think you're doing well.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you being with us today. So everyone, please go and enjoy Joe's website and check out that Substack. I think that's interesting. Right. So for everyone else, please join me again on another edition of Online for Authors. And happy reading, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.